We're going to talk about the characteristics of coasts and the kinds of structures that you see along coasts. And geologists classify coasts in a variety of ways depending on what they're focusing on. They might be looking at the tectonics, they might be looking at relative sea level. We are going to talk in this class about two broad categories of coasts: depositional coasts and erosional coasts, really focusing on what the geologic processes are that are happening there related to the sand. So depositional coasts are where we're going to start. These are not tectonic boundaries. Remember that the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast of the United States are both continental boundaries but not plate boundaries. And they are both depositional coastlines. That means that there are barrier islands and spits and lagoons and other kinds of depositional features along those coasts. So one of those characteristic features is a spit. And we looked at a spit before when we were talking about sand movement. Remember that the longshore current carries the sand parallel to the shore, and as it slows down at the end of a bit of land, it drops water off, forming a spit. Sorry, it drops sand off. Now, barrier islands are also deposits of sand that occur parallel to the coast, but of course they're not attached to the land, and therefore they're islands. They form in much the same way as the sand drops out as the water slows down. So an offshore bar could turn into a barrier island if something helps stabilize the sand there. Barrier islands are lovely places to be, but they are not stable in the long run, and they're very subject to damage by storms. This is a picture of North Captiva Island in Florida in 1999. This beautiful long sandy beach island with lovely dunes, and destroyed by Hurricane Charlie in 2004 when the island was cut in half. So what exactly makes up a barrier island? Well, we talk about three main components: the beach, the dunes, and the barrier flats. All are really critical to maintaining a stable island. Now, the beach has three main zones, actually two main zones and a line. The Forebeach is the area that gets wet every day. That's where the high tide and low tide wash over the beach on a daily basis, and the Forebeach is often sloped. The Backbeach is the area that stays dry most of the time. This is where tides don't reach, and so the sand dries out on the Backbeach. And the berm is the line between them. Sometimes it's very prominent, like you see in the foreground of this picture, and sometimes it's a little hard to pick out. Dunes are located towards the land from the Backbeach, and by the way, they don't only form on barrier islands, of course, they also form on shore. The dune is formed by wind-blown sand, so the sand on the Backbeach dries out, the wind blows it backwards away from the sea, and then it starts to pile up and form a dune. And very commonly, vegetation will begin to form on that dune, and that really helps stabilize it. The best dune is a vegetated dune because it's stable and strong, and it will protect whatever is behind it. On a barrier island, what is behind it is generally called a barrier flat, and it is a very flat region that has salt-tolerant plants growing on it, sometimes houses built in it, and it is protected by the dune. During a major storm, like we saw in the washover fan, the dune could be breached and a big swash of sand deposited on the barrier flat. That's one of the main ways the barrier flat grows. The other is by wind-blown sediment, sand coming off the dune and landing there. Plants are really important in stabilizing barrier islands and in dunes on shore and on barrier islands. And one of the main plants that you see along the Gulf Coast of Texas, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, etc., are mangrove trees. Mangroves are a really interesting plant. They tend to form these long, funky roots that are really spidery looking, and those will form in shallow water. So the tree will actually start to grow when there's not an island there at all. But those roots will capture the sand, and the island will begin to grow underneath the mangrove trees. And as that happens, a different species of mangrove comes in that likes to grow on dry land, and this one that doesn't mind being in the water moves out towards the shore and the island gets bigger. Dunes are also stabilized by plants, and that is really important because the dune's job is to protect whatever is behind it from the storm. And so when you're looking for beachfront property, look for a good healthy dune that will help protect your house.